This is the 10th session in the Depression Seminar. In this session, we are going to discuss the various personalities. My name is Dr. Shane P. Linder. I am a pastoral family counselor. In this session, we are going to discuss various personalities. And in discussing those personalities, we're going to talk about different personality traits that the different personalities have. Many of us have traits from multiple personalities. So don't think that as you watch this video and as you participate in this session that you have to figure out which personality you are, which one most identifies you. In all likelihood, you'll have a primary and a secondary and maybe even a third, where your personality is the combination of two or three different types of personalities. I discuss some of the traits in this session, and then I discuss some of the things that we can do, some of the changes that we can make to decrease problems that these personalities can cause in our lives. You may need to go to counseling. These video sessions may not be enough. Professional counseling, the word professional normally indicates that they have a state license, that they are licensed by the state. A pastoral counselor normally means they are licensed by a church, like a seminary or a conference, some type of religious organization that is registered with the state, has a status, a nonprofit status with the IRS. That would be a pastoral counselor. So a pastoral counselor is not just somebody, or shouldn't be just somebody that calls themselves a pastoral counselor, but they should have a pastoral license, a ministry license as a minister, and then they should have training in pastoral counseling. So you'll hear me use those terms, professional counselor and pastoral counselor, and that's what those terms are referring to. Is the professional is licensed by the state, and a professional counselor may not be a Christian, and even if he is a Christian, the type of counseling that he provides to you may not have any religious basis. So he may not quote the Bible, may not pray with you, but he might. A person can be both a professional and a pastoral counselor. So if you're going to seek some help, and after going through this particular session, if you haven't already felt that you need some help, you might feel that you need some help after going through this session. You can seek help from either a professional or a pastoral counselor. And if you need more help than that, like for example, if you might need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, the counselor that you see should make a recommendation. The counselor will not try to do the job of a psychologist or a psychiatrist if he or she is a good counselor. Now let's jump into this session and start looking at these different personalities. This is a long session and you may have to watch it in two different settings. That's not an issue. Absorb what you can absorb, come back and watch it again if you need to. Well, first let's talk about temperament and personality. I am a temperament counselor. That means a lot of times I use a person's temperament as the basis of counseling. I have a questionnaire that I ask my clients to take. They take the questionnaire. It gives me their temperament combination. We have different temperaments in different areas of our lives, and so there's a combination of temperaments that we have, each of us have. Once I see that combination that they have, I tend to know right there how they relate to different people in different areas of their lives. And that serves as a basis to help me help them find solutions to whatever issues that they are dealing with. First, I want to talk about temperament. Temperament is something that we are born with. Now, some people believe that we may develop our temperament up until we're 3 years old. Certainly we have already developed it to a pretty big extent by the time we are born. Things go on with our brain development while we are inside our mother before we are actually born. And nurses that work in nurseries can tell you that different babies have different temperaments. The only question is, does the temperament continue to develop after the baby is born, or is it completely developed once we are born? And some psychologists believe that temperament continues to develop until we're 3 years old. But at this point, if you're watching this video, if you're participating in this session, I would assume that you are at least a teenager, and your development, your temperament, has long ago been determined. So this is something that's inborn. It's prenatal. Prenatal refers to something happening before we're born. There's certainly a genetic component to our temperament, and it doesn't change. So whatever your temperament is now, it's not going to change. Now, personality, on the other hand, comes from a combination of our temperament and learned behavior. So personality can change, not 100% because we can't change our temperament, but we can change our character, and our character is the result of learned behavior. That is subject to change. So our self-identity is what most people consider their personality. Very simply, we have a temperament that we're born with. We have a character which we develop, that's learned behavior, and those two combined make up our personality. Personality change is possible and often is the result of going to therapy. So personality change is realistic. It is a realistic expectation. But it is not a change of personality 100%, because what we are changing about our personality is our character. We're not changing our temperament. We're changing our character. So let's talk about our first personality that we're going to discuss, and that is the dependent personality. Now, if you have taken a temperament questionnaire with me, and if you're working with me, this is something that the supine temperament is more inclined to develop the dependent personality. Those with the dependent personality seem to be easily dominated by other people, and they're giving people. Those with personality, they give, and they don't often ask for anything in return, and that makes them prone to being more dominated, but it also makes them more prone to getting burned out, and eventually they start to feel used, like the people that they're helping, the people that are dominating them are using them, which is not necessarily the case. Oftentimes the person with the dominant personality has put themselves out there to be used, and the person that is dominating them is simply, do we want to say, taking advantage of the situation? Not necessarily. Let's consider an example of a pastor of a church, and he has some people in his church that are of this dependent personality, and they come to the pastor and they look for things to do, to teach Sabbath school, or to be involved in community services, or to help organize social events, or whatever it might be. And they're always so willing to help that it turns out that the pastor will call them first. And there becomes this relationship where the pastor is using these dependent people to do all these organizational activities for the church. And some of those people eventually get burned out, and some of them start to feel used, like the pastor is just using them. But that's not necessarily the case. They put themselves out there, they volunteered for these activities. And it doesn't have to be a pastor in a church. It could be the boss in some place of employment. And it's the same thing. It's not necessarily that the guy that is dominating is a bad guy. It is that somebody's coming forth, volunteering to do something. Why would they turn the volunteer away and use somebody else? They're going to call the people that express a willingness to do it. These dependent personalities tend to become caretakers. And they can confuse love with pity, and they can tend to love people that they feel sorry for. And that can cause problems. They're often people pleasers, or they're too worried. They're overly concerned about what people think of them, which not always, but many times that's an issue of pride that they are struggling with. They listen to problems, but they don't share their own. So people come to them and talk to them about their problems, but they never open up and tell other people about their problems. So they keep a lot of things bottled inside, build up some resentments, and this type of personality can be very prone to suffering depression. If you do identify with the dependent personality, there are changes you can make that will help you be less prone to experience depression. One of those is to have interactions with healthy people. Interactions with healthy people is a good thing. You may have difficulty determining who is healthy and who isn't healthy if you are experiencing depression. That is where the role of a counselor, like a pastoral counselor or a professional counselor, can help you, or a therapist, or even a coach if you are working with a coach, a lifestyle coach. Interacting with controlling or manipulative people is not helpful. That will cause more depression. And the word manipulative indicates dishonesty. So it doesn't necessarily mean people that are influential. There may be people in your life that influence you to do one thing or the other. But as long as they are transparent and honest, that is not a problem. Manipulative people will influence you, but they use dishonest means to influence you. They're not telling you the whole story. They're withholding information from you, or they're twisting information. They're giving you false information. And so a manipulative person has an honesty problem. But an influential person may be completely honest. So we don't want to think that just because there's somebody in our life that is very influential, that's influencing us a lot, that they are manipulating us. Not unless they're dishonest. That's an important thing to understand. Those with a dependent personality can put up with too much for too long. That is, somebody's treating you badly, you're in a bad situation, maybe a work environment, and you stay there for too long. There's multiple reasons, like a work environment, you might think you need the job, and maybe you do. But start looking for another one. Start sending out your resume, filling out applications, whatever you need to do. You don't need to stay in a toxic work environment. I'm not suggesting that you up and quit without giving notice and without having another job lined up. What I'm suggesting is you start looking for a way out if you are in a toxic work environment. If you're in a toxic marriage, I'm not suggesting that you up and divorce that person or that you even separate. If you're thinking about that, you need to be working with a counselor, a marriage counselor, a pastoral counselor. You need to be getting some third-party opinions to help you work through it and find a solution. A lot of those with dependent personalities lack boundaries. And a counselor can help you set boundaries. They can help you learn how to set boundaries and maintain boundaries. You can buy a book on your own about boundaries, And that can prove to be very helpful too. So there's options, but dependent people tend to lack the ability to create boundaries and then to maintain those boundaries. They have a difficulty being their own person, and that is that they tend to cling to other people and find their self-worth and their value based upon what other people think of them instead of being their own person. Obsessive compulsive personality, the phlegmatic and melancholy temperaments are more inclined to be obsessive compulsive. They tend to have repetitive thoughts, and so they think about something and can't get it out of their mind. They leave the house and wonder if they locked the door. They don't remember if they locked the door or not, and they can't get it out of their mind. Sometimes they'll go back home to check, or did they forget to shut off the stove? And they can't get it out of their mind whether or not they shut off the stove or not. They also tend to have a very strong sense of duty. So they will do things that they don't want to do simply out of a sense of duty. They can be very inflexible and stubborn. So it's hard to get them to compromise. It's hard to get them to negotiate. They have a need for order. If you go into a person's home that is obsessive compulsive, you will see everything in order. If you go into their office, you'll see a desk that is all organized. At the end of the office day, they can't leave their office without organizing their desk and having everything in order. Makes me think of the story of Einstein. There's a picture on the internet. If you Google it, you can probably find it, of Einstein's desk the day that he died. And it's a complete mess. Everything is completely out of place. And that was because of the personality that Einstein had. He was not obsessive compulsive, obviously. So order, having everything in order, is not tied to intelligence, but it is tied to our personality. Self-esteem is more based on completing projects. So they tend to be very goal-oriented, focused on getting projects completed because that is part of their self-esteem. And they are also very quick to criticize others. There are areas that a person with obsessive compulsive personality can change, which will lessen the chances of them experiencing depression, or if they are experiencing depression, it will help them move out of depression. And one thing is that they undervalue emotions. And we see this character a lot in different television programs or movies where they have this real gruff character that, he's hard or she's hard and emotionless or whatnot. Well, the obsessive compulsive personality does tend to place less importance upon emotions. And neatness is more important to them than relationships are. So if it's very important for them to have a organized yard, if they work in industry, for example, and there's a storage yard where they store, everything has to be very, very neat, and that is more important than relationships that they have with people. Or we see this in the family, where somebody is more concerned about how clean the house is than the healthy relationships between brothers and sisters, parents and children, and whatnot. That is an indicator of obsessive compulsive personality. They view others being different as a form of rejection. That might take you a moment to wrap your head around. Somebody is different than you. Okay, let's make it easy and go into the world of politics. In the United States, we have Democrats and Republicans. So when a person that's obsessive compulsive, if he or she is a Democrat, then if you are a Republican, they would take that as a rejection, that you are rejecting them simply because you're different. Or it could be racially as well. If they are African American and you are an Asian, they might reject you because you are of a different race. That may not be nearly as common as the political example that I gave. I would hope that much of society has moved beyond racism, but we certainly see tensions increasing in the areas of political difference. And the same could be with religious differences. I'm Catholic, you're Muslim, you're rejecting me, or I'm rejecting you because of a difference that we have. But it could be other things as well. It could be the music you listen to is different, so that's considered a rejection. The way you dress is different, so that's considered a rejection. Basically, being different from me is rejecting me. They view others being different as a form of rejection, and that is an obsessive compulsive issue. They have anger and guilt issues, and they try to bury those and pretend like they don't have anger and guilt issues, but they do. If they can learn flexibility, that is helpful. And a lot of them will look at flexibility as being weakness, as compromise. But in reality, if they can learn flexibility, that can help them develop and makes them less prone to depression. They need to learn to accept diversity. And as I mentioned, that's a difficulty some have, and we are seeing that in the political realm more and more and more. The idea of saying, if you don't agree with me, leave the country. And we've seen that in a lot of political memes on social media, where somebody says, if you don't like the country this way, then leave. Instead of let's stay here, let's work together, let's find a compromise where we can live in peace and have a diverse culture. They tend to resist that, and they say, if you don't like it, leave. Now we're going to talk about the histrionic personality. Now this is where we get the word hysteria or hysterical. If you've heard somebody call somebody else, they're hysterical. Well, if they're hysterical, they are demonstrating traits from this histrionic personality. The temperaments that are more inclined to histrionic personality are sanguine, supine, and choleric. So, there's a lot of people that are inclined to this personality. They are very people-oriented and friendly, so they love to be around people. They're very friendly people. They can be very charming and social. So you might know a lot of these people. They do have a fear of rejection. They naturally express emotions. So exactly the opposite. Emotionally, they're exactly the opposite of the obsessive compulsive. These people are very emotional. And they can struggle with emotional dysregulation, which is where they transition from one emotion to the other. So they might be calm and level-headed one moment and then explode with an anger temper tantrum in the next moment. So they have a difficulty transitioning, or they could burst into tears and start crying, into a bout of sadness. So that would be an example of emotional dysregulation. Those with the histrionic personality are overly emotionally expressive. And this can be manifested and shown in ways that they express their anger, or they can become very clingy, like the dependent personality, or they can become very anxious, worry a lot, or they become very irritable. And maybe lose their temper because of the irritability. They are reactive to the emotions of others. Thus, they're easily upset. So other people can get under their skin, as we might say, more easily. So they're vulnerable to unfriendly and rigid conditions. So matching somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder or personality, not necessarily a disorder, but matching somebody with the obsessive compulsive personality with somebody with a histrionic personality would not be a good match, because the obsessive compulsive is rather rigid and the histrionic does not do well with rigid conditions. The histrionic is going to want to be much more flexible. Being misunderstood can provoke an emotional response. So somebody with a histrionic personality is trying to explain something to somebody, and the other person misunderstands them, and that really frustrates the person with the histrionic personality. And invalidation can provoke them. That is, they might give an opinion and somebody invalidates their opinion, tells them they don't care about how they're feeling, or that opinion is stupid, or tells them to shut up, that they don't want to talk to them, they don't want to hear them, they don't want to hear what they have to say. That type of invalidation can really provoke somebody with a histrionic personality. Those with a histrionic personality can make some changes that will decrease their chances of experiencing depression, like lowering the expectations. What do you expect from other people? And if we lower our expectations of what we expect from other people, that can decrease some of the symptoms of the histrionic personality, some of the negative traits of the histrionic personality. Anticipating triggers, and journaling is what often helps us do this, is that we make a journal and we write down every time we're triggered into an emotional outburst, and we figure out what some of our triggers are. That can help. It's not a cure-all, but it can help. Meditation is very effective, and mindfulness is very effective. I can't emphasize those two enough, that meditation and mindfulness has a very effective impact on this personality. Avoidant personality. Well, the melancholy, phlegmatic, and supine are the temperaments that are more inclined to experience some of these traits of the avoidant personality. They avoid personal involvement and thus their vulnerability. Understand what they're doing there. People can hurt us. So the less contact we have with people, the less likely they are to hurt us. Or the less we emotionally invest in other people, the less likely they are to hurt us. So they avoid some of that personal involvement with other people so that they can avoid any pain. The problem is with that is they also avoid the joy that comes from those relationships. Excitement isn't worth the stress. So they will avoid things that might be very exciting because of the downside, because of the possibility that things could go wrong. They tend to be very passive aggressive, and I don't have time to go into what passive aggressive is here. I think we have discussed it in an earlier session, but you could certainly type that into a search engine and read quite a bit about that. And passive aggressive is not a good way of communication. It's a very poor means of communicating. So the avoidant personality, the way they experience anger is in very indirect way. They don't become overly aggressive and attack the person that they are angry at. They will use evasiveness, half-hearted commitments. So if they're angry at you and you ask them to do something, they're not going to tell you no, but they'll only do halfway. They won't put all their energy into helping you out or doing something you ask them to do. Procrastination, they may delay doing whatever you ask them to do. Indecisiveness and unaccountability. So you're somebody gets angry at you that has an avoidant personality, and this is what you get. They're not going to tell you no. They're not going to tell you, if you ask them, are we okay? Do we have a problem? They'll say, oh, we're fine. We're fine. They won't be straight and honest with you. They won't say, yes, you made me mad. I'm angry at you. They can be very stubborn. They're frustrated. They're very frustrated for a long time before venting. So something is bothering them and they don't tell people. You have to pry it out of them. They'll indulge in secret sins. So this could be gambling, or it could be pornography, or it could be drinking alcohol. Some type of secret sin that they do in secret that they don't tell people about. They do not realize their need for interactive relationships with other people. We are social creatures, like elephants, for example. They've passed laws where you can't put just one or two elephants into a zoo. You have to have multiple elephants, like a herd, because elephants are social creatures. Well, human beings are social creatures too, and we need to interact with other people. And those with the avoidant personality don't realize that need. So what changes can someone with an avoidant personality make? Well, learning to expose hurts helps. If somebody hurts you, if you get angry, don't bury it inside. Go talk to somebody about it. Learning to emphasize more with others helps. That is, trying to walk in somebody else's shoes. Try to feel what somebody else is feeling. Willingness to feel uncomfortable in conflict helps. And that's a big thing with the avoidant personality, is they don't want to feel uncomfortable. That's the whole purpose of avoiding all these feelings and avoiding people and avoiding relationships, is they don't want to feel uncomfortable. But sometimes life requires us to feel uncomfortable. And trying to avoid those feelings causes worse things to happen than it would happen if we just engaged the uncomfortable feelings and felt the pain, felt the awkwardness, felt the uncomfort. Becoming vulnerable helps. And that is difficult for avoidant personality because they want to avoid pain. And so becoming vulnerable means allowing people to be in a position to hurt them. The narcissistic personality. Now this has to be one of the most famous personalities, because whenever people show any part of selfishness, somebody throws around and says, oh, they're such a narcissist. Well, selfishness is one of the traits of narcissism, but there's not nearly as many narcissists in the world as there are people being called narcissists. Right? More people are called narcissists than are narcissists. The sanguine and the choleric are certainly the temperaments that are more likely to have this personality. And narcissists are charming and extroverted, but so are the histrionic personality, right? So, that just because they're charming and extroverted doesn't make them a narcissist. They dislike being outside of their comfort zone. So that is a trait of the narcissist personality. And there is an excessive admiration of self. They just really think that the world is better off because they're part of it. Okay, well, narcissists are normally in denial of all the indicators of their narcissism. So, narcissists are rarely going to self diagnose themselves as a narcissist. Occasionally, you find some narcissist that has had some type of major calamity in their life, a divorce or something like that, losing a job, getting fired, where they really start to take a look at themselves and will come to the conclusion that I'm a narcissist. But that even those situations are rare. And they normally do not do that. They are very demanding of those that are closest to them. That's, if it's demanding of their wife, their children, if they're employers, they're very demanding of the employees that are very close to them, those that they have promoted and are in higher positions of responsibility. They brag about themselves. They tell people how lucky other people are to know them or to be their friends. And they indulge in dreams of success, and that is that not that they achieve the dreams, many of them do, but even if they haven't achieved the dreams, they indulge in these dreams of wonderful things that will happen that in all probability probably won't happen. Narcissists believe that they are entitled to better treatment. That is, what other people get is for other people, but they're entitled to something better, which of course is so far away from the message of the gospel, of what Jesus taught. Look at the example that Jesus gave when he came to this earth. Jesus being equal to God. Okay, Jesus being equal to God. And he lived a life of poverty. And then he suffered the death of crucifixion, although he was an innocent man. And he laid down his life. He made the point, no one takes my life from me, but I lay down my life. So he willingly went to the cross. The narcissist is as opposite of Jesus as one can become opposite. So that is a contrast. The narcissist believes that they're entitled to better treatment than other people in society. Whereas God himself, when he became man, illustrated that he was one with us. He was not demanding better treatment, but he lived as the poorest among us. The narcissist wants it all for themselves. They want the best of everything. They are subject to experience depression because life doesn't deliver. They want more out of life than what life is going to give them. If they allow someone else to evaluate them, that can help. And I'm talking about going to a professional counselor or a pastoral counselor, getting some help in evaluating. The temperament test that I do with my clients is not going to indicate whether or not somebody is a narcissist. It can indicate whether or not there's inclinations there. There are tests, personality tests, that a person can take that will show whether or not they are a narcissist. Learning to serve others can help, and that is a big thing because narcissists are so focused on themselves. And if they can put themselves on the side and do good for others, and for a narcissist, it's real important if they want a good effect, a good benefit from helping others. It's good for them to keep their charity work anonymous. So they help somebody else out and they don't tell anybody about it. They keep that a secret. And all the good work, all the charitable donations they make, all the good work that they do, to keep that a secret. Now we're going to talk about the borderline personality. Well, borderline personality, the temperaments that are more inclined to have borderline personality are the supine, sanguine, choleric, and melancholy. So a lot of different temperaments can be inclined to have or experience borderline personality. The borderline personality borders on an emotional breakdown. So being overwhelmed by emotions is a good way to put it. They are moody, unpredictable, they can be clingy, and they can struggle with anger. Yeah, and it's not all of these combined, it's a different combination of these different traits. They have a fear of being alone. And again, to have borderline personality doesn't mean you have all of these traits. It's a combination of some of these traits. They compromise their principles. That is, that they have some beliefs about what is right and wrong, but they compromise those beliefs. Those that have borderline personality are more prone to have an identity crisis, trying to figure out who they are. Now, identity crisis is very normal during the teenage years, especially the early teenage years, from 12 to 16. And that is very common to have an identity crisis during that period of time. It's also very common to have an identity crisis after a divorce, post-divorce. So that is a very common thing, because we get married and our identity gets wrapped up in our spouse, and when a divorce happens, we get torn apart and we're left trying to figure out who we are. So that's also a common time to have an identity crisis. Those with borderline personality tend to latch on to people or projects, and then later they become disinterested in them. So they jump from one thing to another. Maybe they're involved in a certain hobby, like model airplanes, and then they get into music and they want to learn to play the guitar, and they buy a guitar, and after a few months they don't touch it anymore. Or they jump from one relationship to another. That's this type of personality. And they have trust issues. Probably don't need to go into that too much. They have weak attachments. Well, if they're latching on to people and then later becoming disinterested in them, that's going to lead to weak attachments, because they don't have any long-term commitment to anybody. Perhaps only their parents, if they have allowed themselves that. Okay, if you think you may identify with borderline personality, there are things that can be done to make life a little better. And one of the most important things for people with borderline personality is to consult with a counselor, even when it is uncomfortable. I don't want to. Have you ever heard that excuse? Why don't you go talk to somebody? And they say, I don't want to. Or the other is, it's a waste of money. Really? What if you're suffering from a biological issue like diabetes? Would getting medication for your diabetes be a waste of money? Mental health is a health issue. And so if you're struggling with depression, you may need to invest in some counseling. Just like if you're struggling with a physical illness, you may have to invest in some health care. If you fall down and you break your leg, maybe you're working on a roof and you fall off the roof and you break your leg. You know what? You know how much it's going to cost to call an ambulance and how much the ER is going to cost? But you got to take care of yourself. You have a responsibility to yourself to take care of yourself. So organize priorities and budget it in and get some counseling if you're struggling with depression, if you're experiencing depression. And if you have a borderline personality, talk to a counselor about it, a professional counselor or a pastoral counselor. Depression results because others cannot cure them. Somebody with borderline personality gets depressed because they're unable to be cured by somebody else. And if you're struggling with depression, you have to do the work. Just like the books that I have suggested that you purchase for this seminar. If you haven't purchased those books and you're not reading those books, you may not get the benefits. You probably won't get the benefits, the potential benefits, from this session alone. If you go through all of these sessions and you do the workbook and you read the 2 other books that I have recommended, I'm not saying that you won't need counseling after doing all of that, but you're going to go into that counseling session really with your eyes wide open, ready to make some changes, and your counseling is going to be very effective after going through all of these sessions. And if you're just struggling with mild depression, this might be it. You may not have to go into professional counseling or pastoral counseling. But this, here we are. And here you are. Meditation, a quiet reflection. Borderline personality is on the verge of an emotional breakdown. And sometimes we need to take a few steps back, find a quiet space. Take your Bible and open it up and just read it. If there's a church, it doesn't have to be the church you belong to. Some churches are open all the time. Some of the Catholic churches are open all the time. And they provide just a quiet place of serenity. And you can take your Bible in there and sit in one of the pews. And I'm talking about just on a weekday, week morning. Like I said, some of the Catholic churches open very early and they stay open most of the day. And you could go in there and just sit in a pew, open your Bible, and read some verses, close it, pray, spend some of that alone, quiet time in meditation. Prayer, talking to God about the issues. Whatever you're struggling with, take it to God. Tell Him. Read through some of the Psalms and some of those prayers that the psalmist was taking his burdens and his cares before God. We're invited to do the same thing. Go to God first before calling a friend. I'm not discouraging you at all from calling a trusted friend or to going to a counselor, but go to God first and talk to Him about it first. Okay, I hope you're coming along in the Freedom from Depression workbook and following through, because each video or most videos in this series correlate with a chapter in that book. That is the textbook for this series, and I encourage you to purchase that. They can be purchased at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. Also, the classic Feeling Good book I have recommended by Dr. David Burns. I hope that you've dug into that and started reading that. And then the Emotional Intelligence 2.0. These are all helpful books to help work your way out of depression. If you are suffering chronic depression, you probably need to see a psychiatrist or a medical doctor and get a prescription. That is something that I would encourage you to talk to your medical doctor about. These sessions are helpful for everyone, even if you're suffering chronic depression, because the things you learn in these sessions and some of the practices we suggest will help make your medication more effective. So then the dosage, how much you have to take, may be less if you accept and put into practice some of the things in these sessions. Talk to your doctor. I am not a medical doctor. I'm a counseling doctor. So I want to make sure that you understand the need to talk to your doctor, because chronic depression is a medical issue. If it is mild depression, you may not need to take any medication for it. But you should have that conversation with your doctor. I want to say a prayer now and close this session up as I normally do with a prayer. Heavenly Father, You've created us all differently, and each one of us has a unique personality and a unique temperament, and there is a path, more than one path, that You have for us to glorify You and to live a happy and joyous life. And we know that there are times that we experience depression, but we want to look towards You. We want the depression to draw us closer to You so that we might experience a more full and rich relationship with You. We ask You to send Your Holy Spirit into our lives to reveal to us character defects, issues that we need to work on. Give us the strength to rise to the occasion and defeat those things that would be stumbling blocks for us, that we might become better servants of You and find joy in the life that You have for us. I pray this in Jesus' precious name. Amen.